I think that the basic cause of our problem is a departure from the principles of freedom that made us a rich and prosperous, a rich nation in the first place. And these principles of freedom were embodied in our nation through the combined institutions of private ownership of property and free enterprise, or capitalism, if you will. Now, through numerous successful attacks, private property and free enterprise are mere skeletons of their past in our country. And Thomas Jefferson, he anticipated this, and he said, or he predicted, that the natural progress of things is for government to gain ground and for liberty to yield. And we see that government is gaining ground. One way to look at how government is gaining ground and liberty yielding is to look at what's happening to taxes and federal and government expenditures. The only way you can look at taxes, or at least one very, very important way you can look at taxes, is to see taxes as government claims on private property. That's what taxes are, government claims on private property. And indeed, if government taxes private property at 100%, it would confiscate private property. And indeed, taxes are going up. And spending is going up. Matter of fact, spending is a much more useful way of measuring the impact of government on our lives. Let's look at spending for just a second to see how it's growing. In 1902, expenditures at all levels of government, federal, state, and local levels of government, totaled $1.7 billion a year. And in that year, the average taxpayer paid $6 a year, paid $6 in federal, state, and local taxes. Today, federal expenditures alone are over $1.5 trillion. Local governments spend more than $1 trillion. And the average taxpayer today pays $8,000 a year in federal, state, and local taxes. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means that as time goes on, you and I own less and less of our most valuable property, namely ourselves. That is, the average American must work from January 1st until May 8th, and is increasing by a day or two each year, to pay federal, state, and local taxes. Now, what does that mean? What's the heart of that? Well, it means that you work that period, and you do not have rights to decide how the fruits of your labor will be used. Somebody else decides how the fruit of your labor will be used. And keep in mind that a working definition of slavery is a set of circumstances where you work all year, and you do not have rights to decide how the fruits of your labor will be used. It will be determined by somebody else, and it will in fact belong to somebody else. So it turns out that we Americans, if you want to look at it narrowly, we might be 1/3 slaves, increasing by a day or two every year. Now, in the economic sphere, the founders or the framers thought that relatively free markets, or what is called capitalism, or non-interventionism, was the most effective social organization for the promotion of individual freedom. And indeed, capitalism is defined as a system wherein individuals are free to pursue their own interests. That is, individuals are not forced to serve the purposes of other people. There is voluntary exchange. There's private property rights held in goods and services. And indeed, we see that much of the original intent of the United States Constitution, and much of the debate about some of the principles of the United States Constitution, was to bring about this kind of, to bring about a climate in which this kind of social organization could occur. Now, many times the virtues of the free enterprise system are demeaned, and perhaps nowhere more demeaned than on college campuses. But the great benefit of the free enterprise system is that through private ownership and control, it minimizes the capacity of one person to coerce another person. And additionally, and just as important, is that the coercive powers of the state are minimized. That is, the powers of the state are limited to what I consider to be the legitimate functions of the state in a moral society, and that is, the one legitimate function of the state is to protect you and I from international thugs confiscating our property. So that means that we should have national defense. Another legitimate function of the state is to stop domestic thugs from confiscating our property. And so that says at some level we should provide police services. Then there's adjudication of disputes, enforcing constitutional order, and the provision of certain public goods. Now, for the past half century in our society, free enterprise and what it implies has been under unrelenting attack. Americans from all walks of life have demonstrated a deep and abiding, somebody's trying to get the door back there. Americans from all walks of life have demonstrated a deep and abiding contempt for private property rights and individual freedom. And I believe that free enterprise is threatened today not because of its failure, but because of its success, somewhat ironically. That is, capitalism has been so successful in eliminating the traditional problems of man, the historic problems of man, such as disease, pestilence, gross hunger, and poverty, that all other human problems appear to us to be at once inexcusable and unbearable. The desire by many Americans to eliminate these so-called unbearable and inexcusable problems has led us away from the basic ideals and principles upon which our nation was built. In the name of other ideals, such as equality of income, sex and race balance, orderly markets, consumer protection, energy conservation, just to name a few, we have abandoned many personal freedoms. The primary justification for the attack on private property and economic freedom, and privacy, I might add, can be found in people's desire for government to do good. That is, we all hear things like, government should care for the poor, government should help the elderly, government should help college students become educated, government should help failing businesses. Well, it's all well and good to say that government should do this, but we must recognize that government has no resources of its very own. And what I mean by that is that all these programs to help deserving college students or failing businesses, they don't represent congressmen and senators in Washington or legislators at your state capitol reaching in their pockets and sending the money out. That's what I mean when I say government has no resources of its very own. Moreover, there's no tooth fairy or Santa Claus giving them the resources. Now, so when you recognize that government has no resources of its very own, that forces you to recognize that the only way the government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate that $1 from some other American citizen. Now, some of you might say, well, gee, well, this terminology that Professor Williams is using, intimidation, threats, and coercion, is just too loose. Well, you have April 15th to check me out. That is, you can tell the agents of Congress, namely IRS, that you don't want your earnings going to bail out failing banks. You refuse to give your earnings to farmers. Give it to them so they can give it to farmers. You will see all the intimidation, threats, and coercion that you want to see. And if you act too ugly, you will get shot. Now, a lot of people say, well, what do you mean, wait till you get shot? Well, that's like, I tell the people in Washington, look, I'm not going to give you any money to give to the farmers. And they say, well, we're going to take your house. I say, no, you're not going to take my house, because I bought that house. And then they come around and take my house, and I'm up at the window with guns. And they'll shoot me, they'll be armed.